Welcome, students, families, educators, community members, district leaders, city and state officials. My name is Filip Hristic, and I'm the proud principal of Ida B. Wells High School here in Portland. Thank you for joining us this evening for this important community conversation about race. We're going to start tonight's event with a land acknowledgement. As many of you know, a land acknowledgement is a powerful way of showing respect and is a step towards correcting the stories and practices that erase Indigenous peoples' history and culture. I want to thank one of our parents and site council members, Alex Hagan, who is also a teacher at Astor Elementary School, along with the assistant principal, Dr. Keilani Haupu, for sharing this land acknowledgement with us. One of our students, Janelle, who is a junior at Ida B. Wells, will be reading the land acknowledgement this evening. Janelle?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Janelle, and I'm a junior at Ida B. Wells Barnett High School. Today, we acknowledge the fact that the Portland metro area sits atop the ancestral lands of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and many other tribes and bands who made their homes along the Columbia and Willamette rivers. Some of these indigenous peoples signed the Willamette Valley Treaty of 1855, only to be forcibly removed from their homelands to reservations. Many of these tribes' descendants live today as members of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians, and the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. We honestly recognize this history and invite all to join us with an openness and desire to understand Native American issues, past and present.
Hi, everyone. I'm Aisha Conning, one of the vice principals at Ida B. Wells High School. One tip for our audience tonight before we move forward, we encourage audience members to click View and select Speaker View in their Zoom settings, please, so that you can see the primary person speaking and presenting throughout the evening. Tonight, we are centering our students' voices, supported by our keynote speaker, Scotty Nash, the Executive Director of Education for the Anti-Defamation League Pacific Northwest, who has been working with our students over the past year. There are many, many folks behind the scenes that are helping to facilitate this virtual event tonight and played a foundational role in making it happen. Thank you, of course, our principal, Filip Hristic, business manager here at Ida B. Wells, Erica Caldwell, our media specialist, Cassie Lanzis, community activist, organizer, and ally, Holly Pruitt, our school webmaster, Leanne Van Horn, PPS Community and Public Affairs Manager, Terry Proctor, Robert Gray Middle School Principal, Lisa Newland, and Assistant Principal, Jeffrey Waters, and our partnership organizations that made tonight possible, the Jewish Federation of Greater Portland, and of course, the Anti-Defamation League's No Place for Hate Peer Facilitator program. We also want to thank our Ida B. Wells High School teaching and counseling staff, many of whom encourage students to attend the event and are attending themselves tonight. Finally, we want to acknowledge the elected officials in our audience. Portland City Commissioner Joanne Hardesty, Multnomah County Commissioner Sharon Myron, and Portland School Board member Scott Bailey. We are also very appreciative that our district superintendent Guadalupe Guerrero and officials from the State Department of Education are in attendance. Thank you to all of these individuals who believe that racial equity work is foundational in creating a more just, compassionate, and equitable community and world. A few logistics before we kick off the event. The event is being recorded. Audience cameras and microphones are turned off. Here's what to expect during tonight's program. introductions from our No Place for Hate peer facilitators, what students are learning about how to be an ally, how to have family conversations about racial equity and social justice presented by Scotty Nash, the Executive Director of Education from ADL. We'll pause for a brief intermission, during which time we're going to ask that you take a pledge. Principal Lisa Newland will share more about that, followed by a call to action for specific racial equity and social justice topics by our students. Our students have a lot to say and offer, so be prepared for some active listening tonight. We'll close with a panel, a live panel of students responding to your questions, and we'll adjourn by 8. We'll remind you later, but during the panel, you can use the Q&A button on your Zoom screen to submit questions to our moderator, which will be me, Aisha Conning, at any time. At the end of our program, we will share an opportunity for you to give us some feedback about the program tonight. Finally, before we turn things over to our students, this is our first time we, students and staff, are putting on a community event that requires some complex technical skills. Some of the students and events tonight are live, others are pre-recorded. If we have any technology difficulties during the program, please be patient with us as we find a solution. And thank you so much for being here tonight. We really are excited to host this event for you. And I'm going to turn things over now to one of our No Place for Hate peer facilitators, Yaniv, who has a pre-recorded statement for you.
Hey everybody, my name is Yaniv Hornstein, and I am a senior at Ida B. Wells Barnett High School. Thank you so much for tuning in to our virtual community event tonight. There are many topics we wanted to cover with you, and unfortunately we only have 2 hours to do it, but we look forward to covering as much as possible. Just because we are all at home does not mean that we can simply ignore the challenges that are facing our world. There has been so much going on in our school, our community, our city, and our entire country, and frankly, enough is enough. So we are here tonight to spread the message of reducing hate and bias. Tonight is our call to action for our entire community. I know that we can all be tempted by our phone buzzing with notifications, but over the course of tonight, we encourage you all to respond to that text message a little bit later and wait to reply to that email, because the future safety and well-being of the youth in our community depends on it. Hate comes in many different forms and is targeted towards many different communities. But no matter who you are, whether you're a student of color, a Jewish student, a transgender student, the point is that you're a human being and that you're worth fighting for. The events of January 6th, where thousands of people decided to threaten our democracy by storming the US Capitol, was one of many incidents that have shown us that over the past 4 years, white supremacists and neo-Nazis have been unleashed and emboldened by a man who held the most powerful position in our country. His actions directly led to what you witnessed early last month. The racist rhetoric that he has continuously encouraged has caused an increase in violence and hate crimes, not just nationally, but here in our own city. The change that is needed in our society starts in our very own communities, which is why we have gathered you here today. Over the course of the next 2 hours, we will be discussing how to reduce the hate in our community and how to become allies against injustice. And we will give you the tools and tips to do exactly that. So please, we ask you tonight to listen, learn, and share this event, which will be recorded, with everyone you know, because it is absolutely crucial that you hear what we, the youth of our community, have to say. Thank you. Hi, I'm Yaniv Hornstein. I'm a senior and my pronouns are he, him. I'm a peer facilitator because as a Jewish student, it pains me to see the level of racial injustice, not only in our country, but in our own communities. And I want to do whatever I can to be a part of the solution.
Hi, I'm Anissa. I'm a junior and I use she, her pronouns. I became a peer facilitator because I think it's so important to have discussions about race and racial bias within our community and taking action towards changing our community so it can be a more inclusive and safe space for everyone.
My name is Anne. I'm a junior. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a No Place for Hate facilitator because I believe education is a great way to combat racism in our school environment.
Hi, my name is Senya. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm a junior and I became a peer facilitator because I want to be a part of what makes our school racially aware and inclusive, especially for those students who will be coming in the near future who are part of minority groups like me. And I also want to be a part of opening up conversation on topics such as racial identity, ethnic identity, and learning to celebrate them.
Hi everyone, my name is Aslan. I use she, her pronouns, and I am in 11th grade. I identify as a queer Afro-Indigenous woman, and I joined No Place for Hate as a peer facilitator because I really wanted to make our school a safe space for everyone, a space where everyone feels comfortable to learn, especially as a queer person of color.
Hi, my name is Ruby. I'm a senior. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a No Place for Hate peer facilitator because our school has issues, and rather than sit around and do nothing, I thought I'd try and help and fix them.
My name is Bronte. I'm a senior and I use she, her pronouns. I am a peer facilitator because it's important to create a school community where people feel empowered to call out hate.
Hi, I'm Nura and I'm a junior at Wilson this year. I use she, her pronouns and I'm a Black Muslim woman. The reason why I'm a part of No Place for Hate and would like to be a better ally is because I don't want anyone to go through the same religious or racial discrimination that I've had to experience, and I want people to have a better support system that they can depend on.
I'm Celia. I'm a senior and my pronouns are she, her. I want to be a peer facilitator because I think a great way to improve our community is by educating others.
Hi, my name is Mia. I am a senior. I use she, her pronouns, and I identify as Chinese American. I want to be an ally because I want to make the world a better place. I think that we need to fight for racial equity. I think we have so many things that we can do to make a better, more inclusive, more empathetic environment, community, and world for us all to live in.
Good morning, y'all. My name is Catalina Montero. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a senior. I'm a No Place for Hate peer facilitator because it's an opportunity to grow my community while growing myself at the same time.
My name is Manar. I'm a senior and I use she, her pronouns. The reason I'm a No Place for Hate facilitator is because I want to be part of the change in making our school a better place.
My name is Gia. I use she, her pronouns, and the reason why I wanted to be a peer facilitator is because I wanted to start conversations with my classmates and be able to talk about racial inequality, talk about how to be an ally, and know how to stand up towards hate whenever it happened at my school or whenever it happened in my community.
Hi, my name is Lee. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a Korean American junior this year. I chose to become a No Place for Hate peer facilitator so I can work to support marginalized students in my community.
Hi, my name is Weiwei Hutchinson. I'm a junior at IW Wells Barnett High School, and I use he, him, his pronouns. I decided to become a peer facilitator because I love to advocate for racial justice, equality, and equity. I want to help and create a safe environment for marginalized students and to also be able to advocate for those who can't.
Hi, I'm Caddison. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a junior. And I joined No Place for Hate because I believe that it is vital that every single individual, regardless of their identity, feels supported and uplifted. And through these discussions and dialogues that we have in No Place for Hate and through the ABL, this goal can be achieved to a certain extent.
Hi, my name is John L. I go by he, him pronouns. I am a junior this year, and I racially identify as a Filipino Asian Pacific Islander. And the reason why I wanted to be a part of No Place for Hate peer facilitating was because I wanted there to be a place where anyone, no matter how they identify, feel comfortable expressing themselves without the thought of being judged or hated on.
This summer's incidents of systemic racism that included the murder of George Floyd and the police brutality used against the Black Lives Matter protesters served as an urgent call to action. Although school wasn't in session, we, the No Place for Hate peer facilitators, made a call to action statement about how we must recognize the issues that our society faces and break the silence that is harming our community. The video reached roughly 3,000 students, parents, and faculty members, including at other high schools, and was even praised by members of the Oregon Department of Education. We want to thank our campus security agent, Garrett Norman, who is also a filmmaker, for helping us create this film. Here it is.
Hi, my name is Maddie Lamone, and I use she, her pronouns. I am not currently a student at Wilson, however, I am an alumni of Wilson. I graduated last year in the class of 2020.
Hey Wilson students, my name is Gia Prado. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a junior.
Hi, I'm Celia. I'm a senior and I use she, her pronouns.
Hey everybody, my name is Weiwei. I'm a junior and I use he, him pronouns.
My name is Lee Holobeck. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a junior at Wilson this year.
Hi everyone, my name is Catalina Montero. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a senior here at Wilson.
Hi everybody, I'm Yaniv Hornstein. I use he, him pronouns and I'm a senior.
Hi, I'm Ruby. I'm a senior, I guess, and I use she, her pronouns.
There is currently a revolution happening among us. Since the murder of George Floyd, there has been a resounding response among the American public to combat the police brutality that is a norm within society. We believe that education is the root of all social progress, and we believe that it starts with you. ADL stands for the Anti-Defamation League. It was founded in New York City in 1913 to combat the anti-Semitism, but then expanded to fighting against all forms of hate. ADL has youth programs such as No Place for Hate, which is a program we are all a part of. We signed up for a 3-day intensive training in December 2019 and were taught how to facilitate lessons on respect, anti-bias, inclusion, diversity, and allyship to our peers. You guys!
All students in the No Place for Hate group are very passionate about racial equity, advocacy, and educating others on why they are all so important. We want our passion to be reflected in our school community, starting with you. Following the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many other Black, Indigenous people of color, we see systemic racism everywhere, including our school. We want to take necessary changes to end this, starting with education. Our goal is to spread equity within Wilson so that students of color and other minorities are heard out and feel safe.
So first, what is an ally? An ally is someone who helps or stands up for another person who is being bullied or who is the target of bias.
Although the ally is not the person that is the direct target of aggression or hatred, their reaction should be strong and supportive and do whatever they can to help the target.
Aggression can include many different forms of bigotry or bullying. Anything to do with racism, sexism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, xenophobia, ableism, classism, ageism, nationality, or any other form of discrimination must be immediately responded to.
Being an ally means keeping an eye out for all forms of aggression. These forms of aggression don't have to be violent. They can be words, jokes, or posts on social media.
Being an ally means more than just showing your support through words. It means stepping up through actions.
There are some scenarios where it may be dangerous to act as an ally. If you feel you must be an ally in a situation, but there is a danger involved, such as you or the target being harmed, do not involve yourself in the situation. Instead, call someone with more authority, such as a teacher, counselor, campus security guard, vice principal, principal, or any trusted adult, as some incidents may happen outside of school grounds.
As you all know, there is a lot going on in our world with the extent of racism and bigotry happening throughout our country. People of color are dying at the hands of police. Celebrities and professional athletes are posting anti-Semitic comments, and people in leadership roles are refusing to acknowledge the problems that we are facing. It doesn't take much to be an ally. I know that I, as well as many of you, have already acted as allies by going to protests, signing petitions, donating, or spreading awareness through social media. These problems have been here all along, and now, through the use of media and your own voices, people are finally starting to recognize the problems and incite change. It is now more important than ever that everyone should consider themselves an ally.
Allyship can happen both virtually and in person. Here are some things allies do. Number 1, confront the situation. Put an immediate stop to the bullying by making a strong statement. That's discriminatory. Challenging intentions. What makes you say that? Or pointing out consequences. This could seriously impact your future. Number 2, help the target. Show support by getting the target to a safe place, both physically and emotionally. Even if you're not face-to-face, you can still reach out and check in. Offer solutions or help in reporting the situation to a trusted adult.
3. Find other allies. Enlist others to take action with you. There is strength in numbers. 3 or more people saying stop or standing up in appropriate nonviolent ways is more powerful than 1 and might cause a chain reaction of support. 4. Know when to report. Tell an adult if the target is being threatened, is in physical danger, if cyberbullying is going viral, or if students cannot handle the situation on their own. And remember that you can report anonymously if needed. And note, this is important, if the target is not in physical danger, or if students can handle the situation on their own, ask the target permission before reporting. 5. Interrupting the cycle. Stop cruelty in its tracks by refusing to forward, laugh at, like hurtful messages, or to take revenge by responding to bullying with more bullying. Nowadays, that most of our interactions are happening online and through social media, it is more important than ever to interrupt the cycle. For me personally, if I came across a hateful post on social media, I would not only privately message the person who posted it and try to get them to take it down, but also have a conversation with them about why what they posted is unacceptable and hateful.
You know, it can be a lot, especially when your friends are in a difficult situation where they're being socially or emotionally hurt that involves another group or person.
It may be a lot to take in, starting high school online and taking in information on how to best be an ally.
By being a bystander, you're not standing up for your family members or peers. By being an ally, you're helping your friends through difficult situations and improving their chances at feeling supported.
Don't stress, we've been there before.
If you sat there and did nothing, you are contributing to hate and being a bystander, which is not okay.
Feelings of depression, anger, anxiety, self-resentment are all possible when someone goes through a traumatic event like hate, microaggression, or bias alone.
Another great way to address a situation would be to talk to Karen and work to educate her, because you know what she did was wrong and offensive, and you want her to change and understand.
If Sarah called Jennifer a racial slur, would you sit there and do nothing?
Just because school is online right now doesn't mean you can't be an ally. Being an ally is a 24/7 job. Always stand up to hate and bullying in person or online.
To best address the situation is to ask how Jennifer feels and if she would like to talk to a trustworthy adult.
So to recap, how can you be an ally? 1. Address the situation by speaking up and speaking out. 2. Listen and find other allies. 3. Help the target and be a good friend. 4. Know your limits and when to seek adult help.
Wilson doesn't condone hate, racism, sexism, homophobia, or any other types of discrimination. But we want you to know that if you need someone, we're here for you.
Another way in which our No Place for Hate peer facilitators shared how to be an ally was by delivering a 1.5 hour interactive lesson with all 9th graders in February of 2020 during Health 1 and College and Career Exploration classes. The culminating activity was a large mural in the main hallway of the school with over 300 statements made by 9th graders where they made brief commitments about how they show up to be allies for each other. No Place for Hate peer facilitators, Senya and Ruby, share more about what they did during the lesson.
Good evening, we are Ruby and Senya, and we hope that you enjoyed the film that we made last summer. Last year, with the help of Miss Conning, Wells Barnett formed our No Place for Hate program. We all came together as people who wanted to set a new standard of inclusion and allyship at our school. Our group completed a training course with 2 trainers from the ADL, and we were taught how to engage our peers on these important topics with different activities and information. After our training, we used our new knowledge to create our own lessons and share with our school's freshman class. We felt that it was important to show freshmen what our school's expectations and values are around allyship during their first year as high school students, and give them the power to be allies instead of bystanders. They too lead change in our community for the next 4 years. Last year, we were able to reach every freshman class and deliver our How to Be an Ally lesson.
So in our lessons, we use a lot of different activities to teach our peers about how they can be allies and effectively respond to discrimination at our school. The main strategy of our How to Be an Ally lessons was to define what allyship means among other key terms such as bystander, which is someone who sees bias or bullying and doesn't say or do anything, aggressor, which is someone who says or does something harmful or malicious to another person, and target, which is the person who is experiencing the hate directed towards them. We also offered scenarios where our 9th grade students were given an example of how bias can show up, and they had to provide a solution and a response. We taught our peers how to take a stand and had them practice how to be an ally in safe and efficient ways. It is important that when you are being an ally, you feel like you're in a safe position to take action. Being an ally means that you take the time to analyze the situation quickly and provide support to the targeted individual rather than escalating the conflict. We are in the process of developing our virtual How to Be an Ally lesson for this year's 9th grade class. Our goal as a No Place for Hate school is that every year we will train our 9th graders on how to be an ally and ultimately make our school a more safe and welcoming place for all young people who enter. Now, we want to introduce Mia, a senior who is a fellow No Place for Hate peer facilitator.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Ruby and Senya, for sharing the intention of our How to Be an Ally lesson for all the 9th graders. I would like to now introduce our keynote speaker. Scotland Nash has worked in education and education support services for 20 years. She has had the role of high school social studies teacher, education director, instructional leader, adjunct professor, and consultant in the Chicago area and in Seattle. She earned her doctorate in educational leadership from Seattle University, and as a teacher, she was nominated for the Disney Teacher of the Year Award and Golden Apple. She earned multiple superintendent and principal accolades and awards for her instruction and collaboration. She was named an ASCD Emerging Leader in 2014, and currently as the Director of Education for the ADL Pacific Northwest region. She works with schools, districts, and their community to learn about identity and diversity, to practice anti-bias strategies for communication, and act as allies for social justice. Without further ado, Scotland Nash.
Thank you so much, and I just want to pause and say, wow, the students at Ida B. Wells are doing incredible work and making such an impact in their school and their community. So thank you for that. It is a pleasure to work with all of you, and it is wonderful to be with you tonight. We are going to have a short, reflective opportunity to think about race, bias, and privilege. I want to start by sharing the ADL's mission. The mission has been the same for over a century. It is to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment to all. When I think about this mission, and part of the reason why I took this job and was so enthusiastic about joining the ADL is because I thought about empathy. I had this vision in 1913 of a group of Jewish people who had been experiencing incredible hatred and feeling really uncomfortable, feeling unsafe, feeling uncertain, and wondering what to do next. As they worked together to say, we aren't going to stand for this, they looked around and they saw people who were Black, Indigenous, gay, different identities that were also feeling the same kind of defamation and hatred as they were. And rather than working by themselves, they worked with people who were feeling similarly to them. They collaborated and understood around their experiences. They built empathy and compassion for one another and worked to secure justice and fair treatment for all people. Is that what really happened? I don't know. But I can tell you that's the image and the story that I tell myself as I think about the work that we have ahead of us now in terms of talking about race, understanding difference, and connecting with one another. In the work that we do, we always start with some ground rules. When we have lots of time, like 3 days with our students at Wilson, they developed their own ground rules. But tonight, I'm sharing with you some of the ground rules we use at the ADL when we want to engage in really difficult conversations. We think about responsibility for one's own learning, that as we step to the table for a difficult conversation, You're responsible for what you are learning from one another. We think about empathy. How do you hear others' stories and connect to them through your own experiences? How are we sensitive to one another's needs and respecting one another's privacy? How do you participate fully? As we heard earlier, tonight we're asking you to turn off your cell phone and engage and reflect in the conversations that we're having. We talk about exploration and examination. What do we need to know that we don't already know? Not just outside ourselves, but inside ourselves. We talk about confidentiality. What we learn and we hear directly from others may stay in that room, but what we can take away is what we share. We talk about trust and understanding that this work takes time. And then finally, we want to acknowledge that these conversations about race and difference are difficult, and that what frequently stops people from participating in these conversations is that they're scared they're going to make a mistake, that they're going to be offensive. And rather than not participating in the conversations, what we ask is that if something happens, if you misspeak, you acknowledge that you've misspoken, that you made a mistake. And if you hear someone else say something that makes you feel uncomfortable, that you pause the conversation by saying, ouch, I'm uncomfortable with what happened, what I heard. This is what I heard. Can you help me understand? So with these ground rules, it's that I ask you to engage in the further conversation that we're going to have tonight. If you're alone, reflect and identify one of these ground rules that's going to guide how you enter the rest of the evening. If you're watching this video and participating in this workshop with someone, turn to one another right now and let them know which ground rule you are holding at the forefront of reflection as we talk about race. If you're so inclined, feel free to put it in the chat. Make it visual so that we can see what you are thinking about tonight as we carry forth in this conversation. So with that, I'm going to give us about 30 seconds of just silence to sit with these ground rules and reflect on how to engage in difficult conversations about race. The ADL in our anti-bias education, not just in the Pacific Northwest, but across the country, has grounded our education work in these 4 guiding principles. We talk about exploring identity. In exploring identity, what we think about is how do you understand all the different aspects of who you are, and are those aspects things that you were born with? Are they things that you have chosen? It's your idea of what you see, but also what is below and you cannot see in terms of identity. What is your relationship with who you are, your understanding of bias, and potentially your role in having power and privilege or not? It's that internal self-reflection and understanding that we know is at the core of what we do. We talk about interpreting difference. How do we value the diversity in our society? How do we adopt vocabulary so that we know that what we're talking about? How do we understand prejudice and discrimination and begin to develop strategies to talk across differences? How do we challenge bias? When we see something, say something. When we hear something, how do we support? How do we check our own biases? And how do we prevent discrimination and further oppression? And then we talk about championing justice. And wow, can we see that from these students at Ida B. Wells High School? There is no question that they are champions of justice. They advocated for a name change. They've built lessons to work with all of their students and peers, and they're having conversations about what it means to have an impact. This is a goal in the education work that we lead with the Anti-Defamation League. I'm going to give you a moment to reflect on this next question. The hard part of talking about race and racism is, or the beneficial part of talking about race or racism is. We know that it's difficult and we know that we need to do it. So again, I'm going to give you a moment to either put in the chat function if you're so inclined, to turn and talk to somebody who's sitting next to you, to write a note and reflect for yourself, or to just silently sit with these sentence stems for just a minute. The hard part about talking about race and racism is, the beneficial part about talking about race and racism is. So as you're reflecting on this, remember, some of the reasons that talking about race is hard will become more evident as we continue through the session that I'm leading right now and the conversation that I'm encouraging you to reflect on and to think about. We do know the benefits of talking about race, and hopefully by the end of this conversation and the end of the evening, those will be even more highlighted as we continue this work. So please sit with that self-reflection as we continue forward. Why does the ADL start their work in kindergarten? In 2001, a study found that almost half of 200 children studied had racial biases by the age of 6. By 6 months of age, children can distinguish different skin color, hair texture, and facial features. We know that there are negative predispositions acquired at early developmental levels that can lay the foundation for manifestations of prejudice. And more than 1 out of every 5 students report being bullied. And we connect that bullying frequently to identity-based bullying, where people are targeting another classmate because of an aspect of their identity. So why do we begin this work and talking about it in kindergarten? Why have some of the Portland public schools joined this work in terms of the elementary school, the middle school, and the high school? Is because we know that it starts early. The conversations need to happen at home because students and children are getting formative opinions and ideas about race early in their lives. So knowing this, what is bias? Let's get some common vocabulary built. Bias, in and of itself, is a preference for or against an individual or group that interferes with impartial judgment. Bias is something that we all own, something that we all have. We all have preferences. We all have places and ways to categorize. We are pulling in hundreds of thousands of pieces of information every single day. And part of understanding that information that we're pulling in is by linking it to things that we know. And in that is part of our process, that identification, building our schema, contributes to our bias and our understanding. And as you can see, bias in and of itself is not negative. It can be positive or negative, depending on how it is being how we see it show up in our conversations, in our interactions. As I said, we all have bias. What we're trying to avoid is our explicit bias. The explicit bias is the conscious attitude, stereotype, and overt intentional actions, again, positive or negative, towards members of a group merely because of their membership in that group. That's when it shows up. That's when we see the bias that takes place. However, we all have implicit bias as well. Explicit bias we try to avoid, we're more consciously aware of it, but implicit bias is the unconscious attitude, stereotype, and unintentional action towards members of a group merely because of their membership in that group. It's developed over the course of a lifetime through exposure to direct and indirect messaging. When people are acting out of implicit bias, they may not even know that their actions are biased. And sometimes what we hold internally or our understanding of our implicit bias can actually contradict our explicit bias. So what shows up may actually be different than what we understand internally. Why am I defining all of these words? Because if we don't have a common vocabulary, we can't have a common conversation. So again, it's not about getting rid of bias. It's about understanding our bias and interrupting when that bias is negative. So how does this connect to structural and systemic racism? Race refers to the categories into which society places individuals on the basis of certain physical characteristics. It's a classification system that was created for social and political reasons. For many, many years, people thought that race was a biological construct. It is not a biological construct. We know that it was a social classification system to put one over the other, to give power to some rather than others. When we understand what race is, when we think about implicit and explicit biases, we begin to connect it with our understanding of systemic racism. Systemic racism is a combination of systems and factors that advantage white people and over people of color. It causes people of color, particularly Black people in the United States, widespread harm and disadvantages in access and opportunity. One person and even one group of people did not create structural racism. Rather, it has been a system that is created over hundreds of years that we have inherited now. And that is why when we talk with you about how to be an ally, how to interrupt bias, and when we think about the work of the students now who are championing justice, we are trying to interrupt and to get rid of systemic racism by having a voice. We can't do it alone. It takes us all. Now, how do we know that it's systemic? How do we know it exists? We know because of research. We know that when doctors have spoken with patients and worked with patients, that they have implicitly believed that Black people feel less pain than white people and given them less medication. This belief has led to people like Serena Williams coming out and talking about her delivery story. We know when people have gone to buy a car through research that people who are Black are typically charged or given estimates that are $700 more than white people. We know that if you're looking for an apartment, you're messaging legislators or you're emailing a university. If your name is more characteristically Black than it is white, that you are going to experience discrimination and less response. We know that in jury convictions, that Black people have been given higher rates of crime and higher rates of punishment than white people. We know that it's not even on here, but we know, for example, that there was a study done by eBay where a Black hand and a white hand both showed a set of AirPods, and the white hand got more offers than the Black hand. What does this mean? This means that implicit bias, when we look at this, is leading towards structural racism. There's this idea that we have a history of policies, practices, and experiences that have led to inequitable outcomes and racial disparities. And that those inequitable outcomes and racial disparities have led to associations and assumptions, the implicit biases that we hold. With all of this, what we need to think about is that by understanding our biases and by unpacking our own biases, we can begin to dismantle the policies and structures that hold inequity in place. We call this leading from the inside out. And in order to lead to meaningful change, any exploration of implicit bias must be situated as part of a much larger conversation about how current inequities in our institutions came to be and how they are held in place. And what is our role as individuals to increase our own knowledge, to talk to our families, our friends, to think about our spheres of influence so that we can look out the window to understand how racism, classism, sexism, and other forms of systemic oppression operate in our institutions to create advantage for some groups over others and disadvantage groups consistently, such as people of color, Black people, women, LGBTQIA people, This happens in every sector of our community life, in examples where I shared with you. Our idea here is that by having conversation, by having internal reflection, we can begin to shift the structural inequities and that produce the inequitable outcomes that reinforce harmful stereotypes, which encourage people, which allow for people to live in poverty and injustice, that we hold these low expectations, that we track our students, that we have punitive discipline in schools. But if we begin to reflect internally and hold conversation with people that we talk to on a frequent basis, we can interrupt this cycle. That's what we believe. These incidents and many more like the ones I've just described sit in this larger context of racial segregation. We saw it in the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and many countless people who have been killed prior to them, who have been punished in the school to prison pipeline. We need to look at ourselves and reflect on who we are and how we can interrupt. We need to pull it from education, health, housing, criminal justice. We need to make sure that we are working to dismantle, disrupt, and engage in meaningful conversations about the inequities that exist. I'm going to ask you to engage in a moment of personal reflection with me. I'm going to ask you to hold your hands in two fists. I cannot see the over 100 people who are participating in this meaningful evening. I cannot see what you look like. I cannot see who you are. I cannot see your hands, but I'd like you to hold your hands in two fists in your lap or in front of you. And every time one of these statements is true for you, I want you to raise a finger. I can easily find picture books, postcards, toys, and dolls that feature people of my race. Television and movies routinely depict people of my race in a wide range of positive roles. I can arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. I am certain that if I need legal or medical help, my race will not negatively impact me getting that assistance. I can do well in a challenging situation without being perceived as a credit to my race or an exception to the rule. I can be late to a meeting without having the lateness reflect my race. I'm never asked to speak for all the people of my racial group. I can take a job with an affirmative action policy without my coworkers or peers assuming I got it because of my race. I can go shopping without concern that store employees will follow me and or monitor my actions because of my race. Children in my racial group do not need to be educated about systemic racism for their daily physical safety. Sometimes in today's society, we are getting a bit prickly around the term of privilege. So I think it's important to pause and look at your hands and think about privilege. Privilege is a term for unearned and often unseen or unrecognized advantages, benefits, or rights that are conferred upon people based on their membership in a dominant group in the United States beyond what is commonly experienced by members of a marginalized group. Privilege reveals both obvious and less obvious unspoken advantages that people in the dominant group may not recognize they have, which distinguishes it from overt bias or prejudice. As we think about the cycle that I described before, as we think about the research that I shared, and as you reflect on your own experiences, go ahead and just pause for a moment. What did you notice? How does that make you feel? What can I do now that I know what I know? What you can't share in the chat tonight, please take a moment to reflect on it. Engage in this conversation with somebody else at a future point in time. If not now, later. Take the learning with you from tonight into conversations with people that you see on a regular basis. We know that systemic changes are going to take many decades. There are pressing questions for me, and I imagine for some others like me, if we raise our daily consciousness on the prerequisites of being light-skinned. So what will we do with this knowledge? This is written by author Peggy McIntosh, who wrote The Invisible Knapsack, and wrote another follow-up piece as well, reflecting on her life as a white woman with colleagues who were not, and she acknowledged the privileges that she was inheriting based solely on the color of her skin. So how do we disrupt racial justice? We must be willing to move from safe to brave spaces. We have to take risks and stand together to create a world of difference. We have to remember what the students of Ida B. Wells said. An ally is someone who has privilege, but chooses to stand for and with marginalized communities by taking tangible, ongoing actions to dissolve oppression. I've laid the groundwork. I've laid the context. What we're going to do now is I'm going to share some strategies and ways to think about engaging in these very difficult conversations. One thing we know is we have to start at the heart of it. Lately, there has been lots of conversation around what is anti-racist. How is this different from anti-bias? I'm going to start with what do both anti-racist and anti-bias have in common? They both require self-reflection, recognition, admission and understanding of our place and space in this world, and self-critique. We're working towards a more egalitarian society. We know that anti-bias and anti-racism is not an endpoint. We know it is a process, it is a journey, it is an experience. The roots of racism work can be found in abolitionism. It was about breaking down prisons and other institutions that perpetuated racism. We're hearing a lot from authors like Ibram Kendi, who are talking about anti-racism and saying that we're not working at a spectrum of one being the opposite of other, but again, that we're engaging in reflection, recognition, and admission and self-critique so that we can engage in these meaningful conversations to the systems that exist. The work of the ADL is to really ground our conversations in anti-bias. It's to really begin to think about how do we engage in these difficult conversations so we can make the systemic and structural changes that are necessary. We believe that if we don't have conversations about understanding bias and how it influences who we are and how we are influenced by it, both and, then we cannot engage in the difficult process of dismantling racism and supremacy that exists in our society. We know we're going to be uncomfortable. We know that we will grow. And we know that our goal is not to make you feel unsafe, but to live with some discomfort so that you get comfortable having a conversation that will move the needle. We want to start reframe our conversations. We move from, I don't see color, to understanding that bias is universal and that my privilege and unconscious racism have protected me from recognizing how I am racist. I think about my own journey, and I remember when my parents, who I don't believe knew the depth of this, said, I don't see color. And the intention of that statement was not to be harmful, but by saying I don't see color, we are simply saying that I don't see part of who you are. So we move from that to understanding that bias is universal and understanding our privilege. We move from I'm not racist or biased and I don't judge people based on their race, which may be true, to moving to I actually have bias and I can change my behavior. And that by continuously reflecting on my racist beliefs and behaviors, I can strive to act in a more anti-racist, anti-biased way. We move from saying bias and racism are not big problems in my community to acknowledging I can help my community better understand and challenge biases, to then even moving further and saying I can call out and advocate for the abolition of racism in my community's cultures and policies. We look at the work of these students who are leading this evening and who are talking explicitly about reflecting on the title of their school and who is welcome and how to feel welcome. And we look at the abolition and the change in their culture, their policies, the practices. So how do we engage in the talk? We set a safe and respectful place. We think about that trusting environment that I described moments ago. We define terms like we did today. We notice it, we name it. We connect our past to our present. We acknowledge, for example, that the police system began as a way to capture free Blacks and put them back into systems of oppression. And we look at that and how it shows up today in our inequitable implementation of the policing system. We understand perspective. I can only share my perspective as a white, heterosexual, cisgender female. And we acknowledge that that perspective matters, and we listen to other perspectives. We think critically about the media. We know that typically we tend to watch the same channel, the same perspectives. I challenge you to look at different perspectives on the media, to break out of your norm and to think critically and have meaningful conversation about the perspectives that come from both sides. Talk about structural racism and white privilege. Think about the activity and reflection we had earlier today. Encourage empathy, inspire hope and activism. Engage in identity self-reflection. You cannot be empathetic, you cannot inspire hope, and you cannot be active in this work unless you identify and understand who you are. And work to increase representation from multiple perspectives whenever possible. So these are things we know we need to do to talk about race. The question is, how do I do that? Be respectful. Acknowledge that this is really difficult. It's really complicated. Be vulnerable. Admit when you don't know. I don't understand. Can you tell me more about that? Admit to making mistakes and commit to change. Apologize and learn and move forward. Be accountable. Ask people when you see bias. Address it. Address it in yourself. Address it in your friends. Address it in your family. Reflect. Internalize what you learn and journal. We want to encourage you to use resources. This is not something that you need to do alone. The ADL has a tremendous amount of resources that support you in these conversations about current issues and current events. One of my favorites is our Table Talk section. If you go to the adl.org and you type in Table Talks, you will get strategies and tools and a protocol, a process to engage in a conversation about current issues. We also have books that matter. We choose books that are representative of different authors and different people, that tell the stories of lots of different identities. And we encourage you to read these books and have conversations about them. Many of our books have family discussion guides. We want to acknowledge that the ADL is not the only place where there are resources. Look into research. The Pew Research Center and the Kirwan Institute have done lots of work in understanding prejudice and bias. Listen to podcasts. I've put the 1619 podcast. There's also Seeing White, and there is also Code Switch. These are all podcasts to listen to. There are movies, especially this month. There are a lot of movies being featured on Netflix, Hulu, any streaming service that you may have. Watch things like 13th, which is a documentary. Watch personal stories and historical fiction. American Son is one of the best movies I have seen in years. Read Just Mercy. Read Jason Reynolds and Ibram Kendi's Stamped. There are a tremendous number of books, including many, as I said, that have been mentioned recently on the ADL website, but there are articles and other places to turn as well. So with that, I want to say thank you so much for listening to me. And I'm going to turn it over to Principal Lisa Newland from Robert Gray Middle School so that she can share with you how this work has expanded.
Thanks so much, Dr. Nash. It's a pleasure to see you tonight. Robert Gray is proud to partner with ADL in our work with No Place for Hate. I am Lisa Newland. You can refer to me out of the room as she, her. I'm a Wilson High School class of '89 alum and a proud Ida B. Wells Barnett High School class of 2022-2023 parent. And currently I'm the principal at Robert Gray Middle School. My role tonight is to uplift the voices of the Robert Gray student leadership team as they have led our community as a No Place for Hate school. Special thanks to our Vice Principal, Jeffrey Waters, and our leadership team, Mr. CJ Mead, who have channeled our student energy and drive to work closely with our ADL partner and Dr. Nash. Dr. Nash, our slide deck has the words of our students, and I'd love for our audience to see how the commitment to being a No Place for Hate school has had such an impact on the personal lives of our students. And I want to uplift those words tonight. On January 18th, we launched our pledge drive, which has thus far reached 332 responses from students, staff, and parents in the Robert Gray community. That is a great start, but we have a long way to go. As you can see reading through, the words of our students speak for themselves. Robert Gray is proud to accept VP Conning and Principal Freesteach's request to join our effort so that we may stand together as a Southwest Portland community of students, parents, and residents who are committed to speaking out, reaching out, and promoting respect for all. As you move into the break tonight, please take a moment to click on the link in the chat so that you may add your voice and pledge that our Wells High School community is no place for hate. Thank you so much.
Well, welcome back, everyone. I'm Holly Pruitt. I'm a neighbor and an ally to the students presenting tonight. I got involved when I saw hate symbols and hate graffiti increasing around Southwest schools and parks over the last year. And so I was really excited to learn about the commitment to being a No Place for Hate community here at Ida B. Wells Barnett and in the Southwest middle schools. And so I really appreciate the chance to join as a community member in taking the pledge and encourage everyone else to do that too. I've also just really enjoyed learning from all of the hard work that the students have put in. I was just really impressed by each of the speakers in the first part of the program, and I'm looking forward to the tough and the courageous call to action that they're going to share with us in the next part of the program. I think that Manar is going to start us off.
Hi everyone, I'm Manar and I'm a senior at Ida B. Wells Barnett High School. We, No Place for Hate peer facilitators, have a call to action to share with you today. As a young, Black, Muslim woman, having allies is very important to me. Part of being an ally to minorities is making sure they know that they are loved and worthy. You can do this by listening to their stories and giving them the space to express how they're feeling. This will make them feel seen and heard because oftentimes they are overlooked or slandered by the media. As white allies, you can use your privilege to uplift the voices of marginalized communities. And that begins by listening. Showing up today and listening is one way you're being an ally. But you can do more. You can demonstrate that there's no place for hate in this community, sign petitions and participate in protests, learn how to interrupt racist incidents, use your social media platform to raise awareness about important issues. With that being said, you should really ask yourself why you want to be a better ally. It shouldn't be because you want to be seen as woke by other people. It shouldn't be performative. It should be because you want your community to be safe and inclusive for everyone. These are just a few things you can do to be better allies. Remember, being an ally is not a one-time thing. You have to continue to show up when you see injustice. Allyship is a 24/7 commitment. Thank you for listening. and now Celia is going to share with you some more ways of how to respond to racism and discrimination.
Thank you to Manar for introducing our call to action about the power of being an ally. Hi, I'm Celia, and I'm a senior at Ida B. Wells Barnett High School, and I'm going to be speaking about ways that we can use active allyship to address discrimination within our own community. We live in a diverse country with people of different races, ethnicities, sexualities, religions, and physical abilities. Just because we are a part of a community that is actively advocating for an anti-racist environment does not mean that we still don't see a lot of discrimination here. This is why it is so important to be aware of what is happening around us and keep an eye out for ways that we can all act as allies. When an incident of discrimination takes place, the first step is to acknowledge it. Whoever you are, you have a role in de-escalating these types of events. Take the right action in order for the audience to firmly understand that hate is not tolerated within our community. We can't always prevent discrimination from happening, but we can foster in an environment where it is not condoned. Remember that you are not the judge of how harmful it is, so take action no matter the gravity of the situation. Racist incidents, for example, do not always happen in the physical and violent ways that we often see on TV these days, but also as microaggressions and through harmful language. It is easy to see threats to physical safety, but remember the importance of emotional safety as well. People of color who face racism are often told to suck it up, as our society does not give enough weight to emotional safety. Everyone deserves to feel safe and accepted in their school, workplace, and greater community. Now that you have acknowledged the problem, what does taking action look like? Here's a few things to remember. First, you should never call out the target in any way, shape, or form. Never force them into the spotlight to educate others. As an ally, that is your job. Second, make a public announcement that racism is not tolerated in our community. Third, decide as a community what you will improve to prevent similar incidents from taking place in the future. For example, hold a restorative conversation and explain why it is not tolerated. Create or enforce policies and rules for how the situation will be monitored or dealt with in the future, ensuring consequence to the perpetrators. It is not about resolving the issue between two people, but instead asking yourself, how can I make my community a safer place and protect targeted individuals? Thank you for listening to my call to action, and now Mia is going to share a similar message along with many community resources she has consolidated in a way that is creative and artistic.
Right now, we need allies more than ever. And the first step to being an ally is to educate yourself. But what does that mean? That can be really daunting for a lot of people. Where do you start? How do you do it? What are the end goals? And why is it important? Well, it's important so that you know what's going on before you go out and help. It's important so that you don't rely on your BIPOC friends, BIPOC being Black, Indigenous, and people of color, to educate you. It's not their job to educate you, it's your job, so that you can be a supportive ally who knows what's going on, what historical events and institutionalized systems are causing what's going on, and what you can do to help. But how? I know that the beginning of your allyship journey can be a little scary, so here are my 3 tips on how to educate yourself. Step number 1, know your objectives. The main point of being an ally is being a productive, helpful, and knowledgeable ally who can step in when needed, which means you need to know a couple of things, including what is race? How does it affect you? How does it affect people of color? What are your privileges? And how do those affect your inevitable role in perpetuating racism? You also need to know what's going on. What are the current events going on due to racism? You also need to know why is it going on? What are the causes of these current events and issues? What historical events influence these issues? What systems, whether businesses, hiring processes, education, law enforcement codes, etc., influence these events and issues? And last but not least, you need to know what you can do to help, whether that be right now or in the current future. These are your objectives. Write them down, and by the end of your research, you should be able to answer all of them. Maybe not perfectly, but just try your best. Step number 2 is know how you like to learn. There are so many different resources, whether books, podcasts, YouTube videos, articles, and documentaries, and more. You don't have to use all of them. Find out what you like and customize your learning to that. And tip number 3, set manageable goals. Don't try to do everything all at once and then quit. Take it one step at a time. Set a goal that fits your schedule, whether that means reading 1 book a month, watching 1 movie a week, watching 1 video per day. Do what works for you. For those of you looking for resources, I have made a Google Classroom called Social Justice that you can join, and it has tons of resources on how you can educate yourself to be a better ally. In this Google Classroom, there are lots of lessons that you can either go through yourself or teach to students. There are specific lessons for different curriculums like psychology and biology with a critical race lens. Also included in this Google Classroom is a Google Sheets I've been working on with lists of books, podcasts, with YouTube playlists, movies, PDX, Black-owned businesses, and more that you can go support and use to help educate yourself. I hope you guys are all taking care of yourselves during this time, and I hope that you guys all stay safe and healthy.
Thank you, Mia, for sharing those community-based resources with us. Hi, I'm Lee. Using the resources provided by Mia gives us a foundation to being an anti-racist community, but we need to do more than educate ourselves. We need to repair the harm that's been done, bringing us to reparations. Reparations are a way to make amends for those who have wrongly suffered at the hands of others. There are 3 types: systemic, organizational, and interpersonal. Systemic looks like governments or systems helping to repair the damage caused by systemic oppression, such as the $20,000 payment to Japanese American families wrongly put into internment camps during World War II. Another example of systemic reparations are the ones the Black Lives Matter movement are calling for. Organizational looks like a group or organization addressing the harm of oppressive situations by helping those harmed by oppression. And interpersonal looks like individuals taking responsibility for repairing damage, often referred to as restorative justice. Reparations can come in the form of money, resources, and time. Tonight we are focusing on interpersonal, but we urge you to support organizations that support the community and press the government to do more. Examining systemic issues and knowing who is hurt by them is a way to understand who needs the support. It is important to acknowledge that your best effort is relative to your ability, and your effort will look different than someone else's. This segment of tonight's event is intended for those who can afford to give more. It is not meant to create stress. Reparations are an important way to act on your privilege. If you are someone who has advantages based on your identity, reparations are a way to support those who have been harmed by oppression. Simply recognizing your privilege is not enough. It is one step in the process of healing systemic injustices. It is difficult to measure what your best is and looks like when supporting others, but we are here to help with this. There's a huge difference between our wants and our needs. Wants are extras in your life that you don't depend on. Needs are what you require to survive. Take a second to think about what wants you have in your life that you can live without. If you were to spend the time, money, or energy that goes into that want into supporting your community instead, what change could you make? Take time to understand who you are and what more you can be doing to support those in times of socio-political turmoil. Your voice, actions, and resources can make more change than you think. We urge those who are able to do more. Thank you for hearing our call to action about reparations. Now, we are going to hear what our fellow peer facilitator, Anissa, has to offer as part of our call to action for our community.
Hello, I'm Anissa. I'm a junior at Ida B. Wells Barnett High School. With the help of my friend and co-facilitator, Anne, I'm going to build on what Lee has discussed and talk about the other side of the story, what you should not be doing. To set the tone, I'm going to run through a scenario. So Tom decides to be an activist. He pulls out his phone and he tweets, #BlackLivesMatter. Congratulations, Tom. You've solved systemic racism. Okay, no he hasn't, but he has to feel better about himself now. More importantly, this is where his activism ends. Having other people validate his support is the one thing that matters to him. Earlier in our call to action, Manar mentioned social media as a powerful tool to create positive change. However, social media activism only goes so far without follow-through when you are presented with racism in your everyday environment. You may have heard of the term performative activism, which Manar also raised, but what does it actually mean? It is when an individual partakes in activism but has no care for the cause and only is doing it for the social capital. This could be posted on Instagram about Black Lives Matter or buying a law sign just because everyone else is doing it. Performative activism doesn't foster personal growth, it discourages it. When confronting white guilt, exempting oneself is not the answer. Saying the right things to separate yourself from the crowd while you don't change your behavior to reflect your words is purely performative. We are now in the month of Black History. Against the backdrop of performative activism, Black History Month offers the opportunity to decolonize and reclaim untold fragments of history. However, the window for education goes beyond these 4 weeks. The crux of performative activism is its temporary nature. The issues affecting Black people will continue beyond the time they are in hashtags and the news. We must value human lives, especially when they are not trendy. None of this is to say buying law signs, t-shirts, or posting on social media to support equity movements is inherently bad, as long as the profits from products you buy go directly to the movements and not companies trying to capitalize on wokeness. $20 to H&M does nothing to help Black people. However, when you use these things as an excuse to not do more, for instance, oh, I've signed a petition, I've done enough, you are no longer acting as an ally. To put this all together, performative activism is identified by intent. To check if your activism is performative or not, answer the question, would I do this anonymously? Remember to challenge your own biases just as you do other people's.
Thank you, Anise and Anne, for sharing that powerful call to action about how to avoid performative allyship. My name is Weiwei, and I'm a junior at Ida B. Wells Barnett High School. The topic of hate and all forms of aggressions related to hate is very complex. Caddison and I want to close by sharing a call to action about why it is important to talk to your children and your families about hate, a topic which Miss Nash so thoughtfully already spoke with us tonight. According to Dr. Susan Lin of Partners Against Hate, it is best if children's early experiences of similarities and differences amongst a group of people is positive rather than negative. What's most important is to fill their lives with as many positive experiences with diversity as possible. There is no right way to talk to your kids about marginalized groups and the hate experienced, but these conversations are vital when creating a social justice-oriented and anti-racist, anti-hate attitude within your family and community. Because of this, the conversation will look different for every single family. Although children are not born with prejudice by early childhood, they have already acquired stereotypes and negative attitudes to those that they perceive as others. An article in Buffalo News reports that about 85% of the brain develops between ages 3 and 5, and that impressions and ideas formed between ages 2 and 4 are lasting. Being adopted from China aged 3.5 and being raised Jewish, my mom appreciated Chinese culture, and so we had many friends and professionals like my doctor and dentist who looked like me. I was bar mitzvahed and was able to identify with people who were just like me, and I could love myself for who I am. For parents, it's important for children to be raised with multicultural, racial, and dimensional experiences. Non-POC families need to have conversations with their kids about race and anti-Semitism and transphobia and all forms of hate, not just those who have to deal with this on a daily basis. In research shown, 200 children they studied had racial biases by age 6. Over the last 4 years, anti-Semitic acts worldwide has exploded. In 2019, there was a 12% increase. When it comes to talking to children about racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or any other forms of hatred, it is important to begin the process as early as possible. As children develop from infants to toddlers around 18 months of age, they begin to recognize their own features and if given a choice, will often choose the doll of their own color. If teaching children how to be anti-racist is not taught or addressed at an early age, then white children in particular will grow up not understanding and more than likely contributing to our country's and community's current problems involving race and racism in particular. Systems and institutions cannot change to be more inclusive if the people in those systems do not understand the issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Weiwei, for a well-researched call to action. I am Caddison, and I'm a junior at Ida B. Wells Barnett High School. These open and honest conversations about race tell your kids that this is a topic that is okay and important to talk about. Actions speak louder than words, and with every anti-racist action you take, those same actions will be mirrored within your own family and children. Having conversations about race in Black and brown households is already commonplace in a process that's referred to as racial socialization, in which parents of color socialize their children to exist, thrive, and be successful in a world which is inherently oppressive towards people of color. Children are aware of being treated differently, but they do not understand why. For white parents, it is just important to talk about race. These conversations can stem from educating yourself and your children on the history of racism in America, if you have not done so already. Mia has shared some amazing resources in her Google Classroom that you can use to learn more, and that you can share with the young people in your household. As a young white woman, I have grown up during a time period where these conversations about race have become increasingly necessary, especially among white people. I'm grateful for the conversations my own family has had about race, especially in more recent years. However, these did not become commonplace within my own household until both of my parents experienced events which furthered their knowledge about race and the necessity of general education about the existence of and reasoning behind racism. This further illustrates how vital education is for parents, especially in dismantling the sense of discomfort and allowing for deeper, more beneficial conversations among families and those who don't directly experience racism in their lives. Now more than ever, we need to see white families step up, advocate, and educate themselves. Talking with children about race is not a one and done. It should begin at an early age and continue throughout adolescence into teen and adult years. If your child was the one experiencing racism, discrimination, or any other form of hate, what would you do on behalf of them or your family? Modeling anti-racist actions is a necessary step to take in conditioning your child to be anti-racist and socially conscious. Despite the fact that these conversations may be at times uncomfortable, they are vital to have. Thank you to everyone for listening to our community calls to action. Now, we are going to transition into a live student panel discussion with Ms. Nash that our Vice Principal, Ms. Conning, is going to moderate.
Thank you, Caddison, and our No Place for Hate peer facilitators, and everyone that is with us tonight. We recognize this is a lot to say and a lot to digest, so thank you for staying with us. We've got a live student panel along with Ms. Nash for about 25 minutes. As our student panelists turn on their cameras, I've asked our community ally Holly Pruitt to speak for a minute on resources related to bias, crimes, and hate speech. The students, go ahead and turn on your cameras, and we're going to share a couple of resources, and then we will start the live panel.
Thanks, Ms. Conning. And wow, students, what you laid out was so impressive, so impressive. And I've been privileged to get a preview of some of the impressive library of resources that Mia and her peers have collected in the social justice classroom. And some of you may experience glitches getting in there based on settings and so forth, but I know that Ms. Conning is going to send a follow-up email to everybody with a link and hopefully figure out some tips on how to get into that classroom. But I really want to encourage you to take a look, and we've got a couple of slides here. Mia gave us a tour through the classroom in her presentation earlier. But if we go to screen share now, you can just get another glimpse at the topics that are there. So you'll see that, well, you can't quite see, but this is all located on the now Ida B. Wells social justice and racial equity page. It's a resources page that looks like this on the left-hand side, No Place for Hate. And then the social justice classroom, you can see the directory of all the different topics on the left, and each of those expand to just a real treasure trove of resources. And then you can see under self-education a lot of what's there. So you'll get a follow-up email if you have trouble getting into that link. We also want to share what's on that page in terms of reporting and support resources. So Ms. Conning, that would be the next slide. This slide shows that there are a great number of options for reporting anonymously and for those who have been harmed to access support. These are on that same resources page for the school. Of course, it's up to each person to report in a way that feels comfortable to them, but it's really important for these incidents to be documented and counted so that we as a community are really paying attention to the levels of bias, crime, and hate symbols in our schools, parks, and neighborhoods. As the students have so powerfully told us, speaking up when we see hate in our community is each of our responsibility. So we can take that screen share off and you'll get a follow-up email about those resources, and looking forward to hearing from our student panel.
Okay. All right, student panelists. I have the first question for you coming from our audience, and audience members, please feel free to continue to share questions with us in the Q&A function of our Zoom webinar tonight. We won't have time for every single question, but we do have a handful here to get us started. So the first one, and Wei Wei, I'm going to go ahead and get you started with the very first question, which is, what has been the hardest part of being a No Place for Hate peer facilitator, and what has been the best part? Wei Wei, I'm going to have you start us off, and then we'll hear from Yaniv.
Of course. So one of the hardest parts that I kind of feared myself was knowing that, putting myself out there in these types of situations and opportunities, that there are people, out there who do not agree, what I do. And they want to maybe like spread hate and harm and threats, towards me. And that's something I also find very hard, is to realize, I just don't want to, be hurt in this process. Also, just another fear I kind of have is that, sorry, just let me think of a sentence, that all of our hard work is being put in, and I don't want that our work isn't being, there's no change happening in our work. I want our work to make change and have students be better allies. A good thing that has happened is the support that has come from my friends and my family and staff members who have been, so helpful in this process. So I really appreciate them a lot.
Thank you, Wei Wei. Go ahead, Yaniv. Same question. What has been the hardest part of being a No Place for Hate peer facilitator, and what's been the best part?
Yeah, so starting with the hardest part, I would say trying to create a lesson plan last year for the freshman class to get them engaged and care about the issues. It was a bit of a challenge, not because we didn't think that they would want to be engaged, but through no fault of their own, these are kids entering high school, right? And they're focused on finding new friends, taking new classes, trying to adjust to high school. They may not be focused on, fighting injustice, fighting racial injustice and all that stuff. And so it was hard to try to come up with a good lesson plan that would get them to really care about the issues, get them to participate and not be shy to share their opinions. I will say though that after we planned it and after we executed our plan and went into those freshman classrooms, it was really great to see all their opinions. Like they really surprised a lot of us by sharing out a lot. And it was really great to see. The best part, I would say, of being a No Place for Hate peer facilitator was the summer video that we showed earlier in the night. And for me, that was the best part because, like I said earlier, we weren't even in school, right? This was summer. We were on vacation. And yet we all decided as a group that this was something that we had to do, that we had to create a film about. We had to make a difference right away instead of waiting until school started. Even though we were technically all on vacation, right? We didn't have that responsibility being outside of school, and yet we wanted to anyway. And then seeing how many people this video reached, not just people from our own high school, but from all the high schools in the district. And there was a person that came up to me in a grocery store saying, "Hey, are you the kid that was in that video about fighting racial injustice?" And I was like, it just makes me feel so special just to see that we were able to have an effect on so many other people.
Thank you, Yaniv. Janelle, would you like to add something that hasn't already been said to that question? What's been the hardest thing and the best thing?
Yeah. I was just going to say one of the hardest things of being a part of the No Place for Hate peer facilitating, I guess, well, it's already been said, pretty much what we have to say. The fact that people will hate on you no matter what you do, but also the fact that we're doing this online. That's kind of been a struggle trying to get people's attention and whatnot. But the best part of being a part of this organization is the fact that we're actually creating change here, not only in our community, but in our schools, making everyone feel comfortable. And yeah, just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Janelle. Okay, our next question, I'm going to have Lee start us off, Lee and then Aslan. Our next question is, and I'm looking over here because I have our questions written over here. From a student perspective, what can teachers do to best support our BIPOC and LGBT students in the classroom? Lee, do you mind starting us off with that one?
Yeah, of course. So I think it's really important for teachers to be prioritizing student safety, especially emotionally. I think I can speak for myself. And I know a few of my other peers that I don't really feel supported by most of my teachers, even if I know they're sitting on the equity board, or if they have these goals in mind, they still might not be executing it correctly. So that's why we're doing things like this. We're here to provide you resources through, Mia's Google Classroom, live events, and educating our students as well as our teachers. So just a few bits of advice I would say is don't be colorblind. Know that every student walking into your classroom, they come from their individual racial background, and in a majority white school, that is going to affect how they perceive themselves and compared to their students. As a non-binary student, please learn to use they, them pronouns. Understand that trans students are everywhere, even if they're not out. Students might start transitioning mid-year, or they might be experimenting with pronouns. I would say make it clear to your students that you are going to be creating a safe space, and not just say it, but act on it. Understand what you can do, giving our resources we're providing you.
I believe you were muted, Miss Conning, but I will go. Yeah, I would just love to echo everything that Lee said. It's been amazing to work beside them and, throughout this entire process. So just to echo everything that they said 100%. But I'd really just like to speak to how damaging it can be to be in classrooms, especially history classrooms, where I am the only person of color, the only queer person, the only Black person, the only Indigenous person, and I'm constantly being exposed to trauma. That could be videos about slavery, that could be videos about any form of oppression that has to do with any of my identities. And so to teachers in the classroom, I'd really just advise to promote content that shows joy and happiness and love, that shows Black joy and Indigenous love, and those relationships within these different marginalized communities that aren't centered around trauma. Because while I do think it's super important to have that narrative and to make sure that people are educated, you also have to think about the students that are in those classrooms that have to experience those things every single day and don't want to be in their learning environment being exposed to even more trauma. And so when you have the audience that our school has, a predominantly white audience, you can use that as an opportunity to show the different sides of Black culture and Indigenous culture and queer culture that isn't always centered around death and harm and being marginalized and oppressed, because that's only one side of the story.
Thank you, Aslan. Aslan, I'm wondering if you could take us to the next question, and then Senya, we want to hear from you on this next question, which is, what role does community and collectivity play in dismantling the institution of racism? Aslan, do you mind starting us off on that one, and then we'll transition over to Senya?
I'd actually like to pass it to Senya first, just because I just spoke and I'd like to pass it to her, but I will speak after her.
Thank you, Aslin. So when thinking about this question, what originally comes to mind is the fact that there is a lot of power in allyship and representation. When I say there's power in allyship, allyship should be an ongoing action throughout your life. And, you know, it is definitely a label that has become very popularized, especially during the rise of BLM over quarantine. And I feel that sometimes it can lose its meaning. It can be quite watered down. Allyship should be something that you are constantly doing, whether that is educating yourself or through educating others. I feel that the most powerful form of allyship is when people use the skills that they already have to be an ally and advocate for marginalized communities. And when I say that there's power in representation, look at the timelines that you have on social media. Are you seeing a diverse array of people and ethnic backgrounds and stories and identities that you are constantly looking at on your feed? Are you reading books by authors of marginalized communities speaking on their stories and uplifting other marginalized voices? So yes, that's definitely something to keep in mind. As a community, there is power in numbers as well. So tell your friends, educate your friends, and normalize these conversations, as hard as it may be. It's important in being the progressive world that we want to be.
Thank you so much, Senya. Haslin, did you want a chance to add to that?
Yeah, just briefly, I think I value community and the collective to the highest extent. I spent my entire summer alongside Senya as just one of the amazing Black women I was alongside throughout the entire summer, protesting in the streets of Portland every single week. And there's nothing like being in that type of environment and being around other people, specifically other Black people, that are fighting the same fight. We're fighting for Black liberation. We're fighting for Indigenous sovereignty. You know, we're fighting to dismantle all of these oppressive institutions and systems that are this country. But when we look at how we need to decenter white supremacy culture from our spaces, I think it starts with looking at how white supremacy culture thrives off of the mentality of individualism, and how, especially in this country, people have such an individualistic mindset, whether that comes to wearing a mask or protesting or standing up for your beliefs. And just the idea of, if I'm inconvenienced in my own individuality, then I'm not going to do it. And that's a very Eurocentric ideology. That's a very Eurocentric practice. And so when we look at what it means to be actively anti-racist, not racist, because if you're white, you can't not be racist. You're benefiting from the institution of racism. What's important is to be actively anti-racist and to wake up and choose to be actively anti-racist every single day. And while you may be doing it for yourself, you're doing it for the collective. You're doing it for Black people. You're doing it for queer people. You're doing it for trans people. You're doing it for Indigenous people. Because we can't overcome these systems that are literally built into every single institution in this country unless we're doing it as a collective. And so stepping away from that individualistic mindset is so important, and is why I truly believe community is the only way we will be able to dismantle these oppressive systems.
Thank you so much. I learned so much from our student voices. Thank you. Next question. Let's see here. Okay, I'm going to have Lee start us off with this next question, and then we can go to Weiwei. The next question is, what advice do you have for middle school students who will attend Ida B. Wells Barnett High School and want to engage in anti-racism and racial justice work?
Yeah, so I would say start educating yourself and your peers. I think myself, as in middle school, we never talked about race. I didn't have the space that I have in high school. So when I see Robert Gray starting to do initiatives with No Place for Hate, it's really heartwarming. So I would say look at resources from MIA and from our website. Continue to grow yourself and your peers, but also learn from us. We're doing our education for freshmen, so we're here for you, and we want to continue to uplift your voices. And I think we're not sure how this is going to work during we're online right now, but in the future, you can become No Place for Hate peer facilitator, so you can educate your peers. So I would say create a community, listen to Aslin. We're gonna continue to grow as a group and educate yourself and others. Yeah.
Thank you, Lee. Wei Wei, do you want to add to that?
Thank you, Lee, for that amazing comment. Great advice I would give to middle school students is to join affinity groups, and also to reach out to administration like Ms. Conning to say, I want to help, I want to volunteer, and to speak in classes and to get out of your comfort zone. And I'm going to put in kind of a personal experience of mine of how I got out of my comfort zone being new to Ida B. Wells as a freshman. I had a swastika be put on my geometry desk, and I was, scared, and I didn't know what to do. So I went, to my mom, and my mom said, we can get through this together. So I went to my teacher, and I said, there was a swastika drawn on my desk, and I'm, hurt. And we went to the administration, and we got that taken care of, and they put the desk away. So it felt good to know that I got the situation done.
Thank you, Wei Wei. Ms. Nash, there is a question for you specifically, and the question is, what other schools in Southwest Portland are making a No Place for Hate commitment, and how can these efforts be connected across schools and with other parts of our Southwest Portland community? Perhaps you have some advice for us there.
What an excellent question. So I can tell you right now that we have a number of schools that have signed up for No Place for Hate in Portland. We have Woodlawn Elementary School, Harriet Tubman Middle School, Lincoln High School, Ida B. Wells, obviously, Robert Gray, obviously, as we've heard from both those schools. Jackson is doing some work as well. And while Oregon City is not part of Portland Public Schools, they are a neighboring town. And I'm going to share with you what they've just done in terms of being awarded a Metro City grant that they applied for. And they're launching a district-wide initiative that is starting by doing committee meetings and committee training in all of the schools within the district. So that's a much smaller training than what these students did. It's just a 3 to 4 hour training, but we're doing it kindergarten through 12th grade at all of their schools. So what could Portland Public Schools do? We could start a conversation about how to take this momentum and make a district-wide initiative, because I can tell you that these students influenced the addition of Robert Gray, of Jackson, of Lincoln, being enthusiastic and excited in participating in this work. So the best thing to do is to reach out to me if you're interested in bringing it to other schools. I'll put my email in the chat. It will be in the follow-up from Ms. Conning, and that's all I'm going to say.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nash. Okay, I think we have time for a couple more questions. The next question is going to go to Yaniv, and then our final question is going to go to Mia. And there are more questions, and I know we're not going to get to all of them. However, we're going to ask you for your feedback, and you can put your question in the feedback, and we can get back to you through email and possibly through another conversation. So Yaniv, next question. In 3 months after your training, while you were in school in person, were there bias incidents that you were able to interrupt in the hallways or in class? Did you see improvement in the climate at the school?
So I think that's a really good question. And it relates to a question about like the effectiveness of what we were doing while going into freshman classrooms. And I think it's important to understand that this is not going to be an overnight change, right? So we went into freshman classrooms. You're not going to see that next week that there's nothing wrong going on in our high school. And I think that's something that everybody really needs to understand. What we're doing is we are starting a conversation, we are increasing awareness, and we are just creating a path for the rest of the Ida B. Wells high schoolers to continue this conversation about race. This is what we're doing tonight. This is what we wanted to do in person a little less than a year ago until it was unfortunately canceled because of COVID. And I believe that our high school is going to be put to the test when we are able to return in person. I think that because of online school, because of COVID, we don't really know how much of an effect we are having yet. And so we're going to be put to the test. There's no doubt. But again, I think that it's important to remember this is not going to be an overnight change, not in our own city or our own school, not in our own community, and definitely not in our own country. But what we're doing is we are trying to start a change. And that means that you're starting these conversations. You're going to freshman classrooms. You are just trying to increase awareness so that people are now aware that when they see those incidents, they know how to respond. And yeah.
Thank you, Yaniv. Okay, Mia, you're gonna bring us to a close with, I would say, a really big question. And thank you for your willingness to answer it. Here's the question. What empirical evidence exists that conversations and reflections actually interrupt the cycle of implicit bias and structural racism? Under what circumstances are these more effective? Go for it, Mia.
Okay, so when I asked this question, I went straight to my AP Psych notes from last year. But first, I would like to just say, I think the overemphasis on needing evidence and needing scientific proof that something works is a very Eurocentric and white ideal. I think that conversations are just as important, but I would like to address that. So if we want to get into the science, I went back into my notes, and I think part of the reason why it's so important to have them is because we have this thing called the fundamental attribution error, right? Which is where we go in and we talk to somebody, or we don't talk to them at all, and we attribute their behaviors to who they are rather than to circumstances. But a lot of times behaviors are due to circumstances and not because of who they are. For example, if I was just sitting in my classroom and somebody's like, wow, she's so smart, it must be because she's Asian, right? There's an attribution to my identity rather than maybe I studied for 5 hours last night, right? So that's one thing. If you have a conversation with somebody and you actually engage in dialogue and you get to know them, you'll understand the circumstances in which they're engaging in their behaviors rather than attributing it to some aspect of their identity that doesn't matter to that. Additionally, your hippocampus is in charge of sorting memories. And I remember that because Loveless was like, it's like if there's a hippo on campus. And it prefers vivid cases over like less vivid cases or smaller cases. And no offense to lectures and no offense to classroom settings. However, that being said, I think a personal conversation between two people who are friends or have a relationship might be a more vivid case than having a lecture and just sitting in the back row. I don't know if that's right. For me as a student, that's how I feel. So I think conversations can be more effective if it's a one-on-one between two friends or two people who you really respect. And I think sometimes that message comes across better than any book or any YouTube video can come across because it's a more vivid case and you're psychologically more likely to remember it. That being said as well, there's also cognitive dissonance, which is what you can go through when you are hearing some new points of view. And that is your brain when its attitudes are not matching what it's like hearing or what it's absorbing or your own behaviors. And so within that, your brain has to adapt and adjust your schema, like your mental schema, to whatever you're consuming. And so that's literal growth from a conversation. And that is also scientific growth. And then you have the Robbers Cave. So the Robbers Cave experiment was on prejudice, and they put a bunch of people together and they pitted these two teams of young kids against each other in a bunch of competitive activities. And they kept going until there was a bias against the two groups. And then after there's a bias, they put the two groups together and had them do teamwork and those types of activities where the activities were more based on getting an objective together. And that actually decreased prejudice. And I know that's not the same as years and years and years and centuries of prejudice and systemic racism and whatnot. But I believe that when you put people together in to a conversation with an objective, and you're working together to talk about something important. That's an objective, that's a goal, that's something you're working towards. And that is something that's mimicking the same Robbers Cave experiment, which you can look up if you want. In my opinion, that has been proven to decrease prejudice. And last but not least, there's the mere exposure effect. And the more you see something and the more you hear something over and over again, the more you like it. So the more conversations we have and the more we talk about these important issues, the more your brain enjoys it, I guess, or the more your brain expects it and becomes familiar with it, because we like what is familiar. So that is my answer. I believe that conversations are important, and I understand that sometimes it may not feel like you're not getting anything done, but you can't see inside the brain unless you have a cool, fancy scanner, and we don't have those. So this is all I have for you, and I truly believe that there's a meaningful impact between just having a conversation. I'm done. Thank you.
Wow. Now the audience knows why I have the best job in the world, and so does Ms. Newland and Principal Reach-Ditch and Ms. Lanzis and Ms. Caldwell. We get to spend our days learning and hearing from these amazing, brilliant young minds. And on that note, I want to share a few comments. No place for hate peer facilitators with you. One is from a teacher at Ida B. Wells High School. I just want to congratulate all the students who are involved in our No Place for Hate program. Y'all are amazing, and I am so proud to have you as leaders at Ida B. Wells Barnett High School. Another comment came in from another English teacher, Miss Diamond. A shout out to these amazing students. I'm humbled by them and so proud to teach at Ida B. Wells High School. Couple other anonymous statements, and then we'll turn to our closure. Thank you, students, for your impressive work on the No Place for Hate program. You are all true leaders and role models. Finally, huge thanks to you all. I am grateful for and respect your commitment and willingness to engage your fellow students. I think y'all rocked it tonight. We're going to turn it over to Nura for a close, and audience viewers, please look in the chat. Nura will tell you more about that. Nura, it's you to close us out for the night.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Nora, a junior at Ida B. Wells Barnett High School and a No Place for Hate Peer Facilitator. Once again, we'd like to thank everybody for coming to our first virtual ADL No Place for Hate student facilitated event. Thank you for not only taking time out of your day to be here as allies, but also for staying present the entire time. We'd like to get your feedback by asking you to fill out a short survey. The link to the survey will be placed in the chat, and we'll also be sending an email to everybody who registered. It's important to recognize how prevalent hate is not only in our school, but also in our community as a whole. We're very fortunate to be able to take this necessary first step in creating a more equitable environment with you all here tonight. We are committed to making Ida B. Wells Barnett High School a place where all students, regardless of race, religion, gender identity, or sexuality, feel safe and welcome. Attending tonight's program is one step toward achieving that goal, and taking the No Place for Hate pledge is another way. As you heard from Scotty Nash and my peers here tonight, remember that being an ally is more than just not spreading hate, it is actively working against it. We encourage you to take the information you learned here and apply it to your daily lives, share it with the people around you, and continue educating yourself on how you can be an even better ally. We are doing our part and invite you to do yours as well. Lastly, I'd like to give one final thank you to the peer facilitators who worked tirelessly to put this event together, to the adults who gave their continuous support, and you all for attending. Thank you and good night.